Welcome to the News Roundup for Monday, December 29, 2025. I'm Bill Thomas, and here's what's happening right now. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar's business dealings increasingly under the magnifying glass after her husband's alleged venture capital firm removes a bunch of critical information from their company website. Governor Tim Walz desperately trying to fend off growing fraud mismanagement accusations after a viral video reveals additional Somali aid fraud, this time involving millions of dollars in apparent daycare scams. And the FBI sending an enormous surge of federal agents to crack down on Minnesota's massive fraud schemes, and now warning that possible deportation hearings could soon follow. Also, retiring Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi makes a shocking prediction about the 2026 midterm elections. And Leonardo DiCaprio in the news. His supermodel girlfriend has apparently had it up to her ears with the constant meddling of his Titanic co-star, Kate Winslet. All this and a bunch more coming up right now on the Big Roundup. We have a great deal to get to today, and we begin with a breaking update concerning the staggering increase in net worth of Representative Ilhan Omar, whose personal fortune has coincidentally managed to skyrocket while an alleged multi-billion-dollar fraud scheme was picking up steam and right under her nose. Investigators are now probing just about everything having to do with the Somalia-born lawmaker, including the financial backing behind her current husband's venture capital firm, which she claims has a net worth now of as much as $25 million. In her most recent financial disclosure statements, Omar says that in just 1 year, the organization, which she launched with her husband back in 2022, rose from being nearly worthless to its current astronomical value. A number of people are now extremely curious as to how and why that company became worth so much, and virtually overnight. And apparently Omar and her third husband, Tim Minette, they are well aware of that fact also. According to reports, as the Minnesota fraud scandal recently grew to include more and more members of the local Somali community, the pair decided to overhaul their company website and remove all of the names of the bios of all the organization's key officers, their advisors as well. Gosh, I'm thinking out loud, but I hope they're not trying to hide anything. Now, digging a bit deeper, it's what we do. We dig. It seems that many of those individuals whose names were removed are directly related to the Democratic Party. They include a number of financial gurus who worked at the highest levels for the Democratic National Committee, our pals at the DNC, as well as a couple of former ambassadors who served during the Obama administration. Furthermore, Omar and her husband are also partners in a highly questionable wine company that's been sued in the past for fraud and whose value also recently went through the roof. On her congressional form, she claims that in 2023, that company was worth less than $50,000. And follow this math, she now pegs its value at nearly $5 million, despite no evidence that it's engaging in any kind of business at all. Now, that's worth kind of whining about for a bit. Even more suspiciously, neither of her husband's companies has a fixed permanent address, with each claiming that their offices are located at a widely used community workspace. Well, that doesn't sound too suspicious. Additionally, their wine company apparently doesn't even sell wine anymore. According to one report, the organization's website link is broken, the phone number's been disconnected, and the company hasn't posted to social media for years. You got to kind of wonder what's in that wine. Omar has been keeping oddly quiet about all those recent developments. In the meantime, she continues to be linked directly to a number of convicted Somali fraudsters, including several who donated thousands of dollars to her campaign, all of which she claims that she has returned. Final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. Disclaimer, you may not like what I'm about to say, but hunker down, America. Nobody else is going to say it, so I'll be the first. Get off her back. Here's the deal, and hear me out. Over the past several weeks, this Ilhan Omar person, and I like her. I think she has a very welcoming smile. Look at that pretty smile. She's been dominating the headlines, and tons of folks have been suggesting that she's not exactly on the up and up. So, people have written to us kind of complaining about the Congresswoman, the exorbitant amount of fraud which occurred in her district, Minnesota's fabulous 5th, and the dozens of people who've been convicted for a variety of crimes related to fraud in her state. Now, over the weekend, I corresponded with tons of folks on this channel who were telling me that what she's done financially by going from zero to hero, absolutely impossible. And I take exception to that. Instead of vilifying the esteemed representative, we should all be patting her on the back for being creative, hardworking, and walking, talking proof that anybody in our great country can get rich quick if you know what you're doing. Perhaps instead of complaining about her, you'll do what I did, and that's buy a brand new book, which is almost guaranteed to help you get filthy rich and pretty darn quick. The name of that new book is called How to Snag $30 Million Almost Overnight on a Government Employee Salary for Dummies. Yeah, it's a fantastic book, a real page turner, and a real quick read. Fraud? Yeah, that's what the cynics are saying, but I say buy the book, make a quick buck, and live happily ever after. What are you thinking? Leave us a comment. Let us know if you plan on buying that new book. After all, you want $30 million, don't you? I want my $30 million. All right, turning now to another major political figure who's currently under extreme pressure for his dreadful handling of the Minnesota fraud scandal. Yeah, Governor Tim Walz, he's been in the news quite a bit lately. Shocking new evidence that shows the problem might even be worse than previously believed. Got to think about that. How much worse could this get? Walz and his team desperately trying to save face once again after a viral video emerged over the weekend showing that a number of the blue state's daycare centers, they're apparently fraudulent, abandoned, and totally inactive. But outside of that, it sounds pretty authentic. In that video, a guy named Nick Shirley goes on to a number of reputed Minnesota daycare facilities and discovers that many of them appeared nothing more than fronts for illegitimate organizations. Yeah, in one case, a child care center which received nearly $4 million in state funds is found to be completely empty with a misspelled sign over the door which reads leering instead of learning. Yeah, it's kind of a head scratcher. The video maker claims that in just one day, he uncovered nearly $110 million worth of fraud, and that finding the alleged criminality was so easy, a kindergartner could do it. Goes on to say this is just tip of the iceberg, that taxpayers work too hard to allow this to happen. You and I, we're both taxpayers, and that Walz is an American pirate who must be held accountable for what's going on. Meanwhile, rather than taking full responsibility for their lack of oversight, the governor and his squad now pinning the blame squarely on, yeah, you guessed it, his own state legislature. What he's doing is kind of passing the buck, which is difficult because most of the bucks, they've already been passed. They've already been stolen, pilfered. They now say the governor has been trying for years to crack down on the problem, and that the entire time he's been practically begging lawmakers for the power to take more aggressive action. They also claim, and check this out, that Walz has ultimately strengthened oversight throughout his state by launching investigations into a whole bunch of the daycare centers featured in the viral video. It's kind of like this. Tim Walz, no, he didn't invent delusional, but I think he kind of perfected it. Yeah, making things worse during last year's vice presidential debate, Walz actually bragged about how easy he made it for people in Minnesota to set up their own childcare business. One person on social media now jokes he made it so easy, people didn't even have to provide any childcare at all to get paid. It's the perfect crime. And final thought, this is the News Roundup Lowdown. The most interesting part of this story is that a representative for the governor says that Timbo has tried to crack down on fraud. Now, it's only a guess, but when the representative said that, perhaps that was his shot at sarcastic, acerbic humor. It's like Venezuela's leader, Nicolas Maduro, Little Nicky, saying he's trying to crack down on drug trafficking. No, he's really not. Just thought we'd go international for just a brief moment. Now, look, even if the claims are authentic, the hopefully soon-to-be ex-governor Tim Walz tried to fix issues related to fraud and corruption. He failed miserably in his duties as Minnesota's chief executive officer. And were he in the private sector, the board of directors, they would have fired him a long time ago. Once removed, the board would install a new CEO. Confidence in the output, it'd be restored. Stock prices might rise. Shareholders would be more than happy. And there would possibly even be a sweet year-end dividend. Hey, Minnesota, you're a business. Fire your governor, your CEO. Install new management. Get your state back on track and prepare to live happily ever after. Bottom line, Governor Tim Walz has essentially been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Up to $9 billion in cookie-type fraud is being investigated, and it all happened on his watch. Staying on topic now and turning our attention to the Trump administration's efforts to investigate the growing welfare fraud in Minnesota, safeguard the people who live there, and hold the offenders responsible for their crimes. Now, for starters, FBI Director Kash Patel announcing plans to deploy a growing number of federal agents to the North Star State and saying their mission is to completely dismantle the massive fraud schemes which are abusing government programs. Patel says the Bureau is well aware of what's going on under Governor Walz's watch, that stopping fraud which steals from vulnerable children will always be a top priority for the FBI, and that his agency has already toppled a massive money laundering scheme in the state. Additionally, he says it's just the tip of the iceberg, and that his organization is directly responsible for exposing and destroying a number of fake vendors and companies directly linked to the Feeding Our Future scandal, ultimately resulting in dozens of charges and convictions. The FBI director goes on to warn that the investigation is still very much active, that the Bureau is actively following the money trail, as well they should, and that whenever possible, captured offenders, they're going to be referred to immigration officials for potential denaturalization. You're no longer natural, and deportation proceedings as well. Get out of town. So, more than 90 people have already been charged in connection with the Minnesota fraud scandal, and nearly all of them are of Somali ancestry. Now, as a result, ICE agents are now going door to door, targeting questionable sites throughout Minnesota, and all in order to root out possible illegal immigrants who are potentially linked in some way to the state's outrageous fraud schemes. In the meantime, the messy situation up north is now attracting the attention of a number of prominent Republican politicians, many of whom are calling Walz's handling of the situation shameful. They include Vice President J.D. Vance, who says that what's going on in Minnesota, basically a microcosm of the massive immigration fraud which is taking place throughout our entire immigration system. Final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. It's important to note that over the weekend, a large number of comments, they were left for us here on the channel, indicating that absolutely nothing is going to be done, and that these investigations aren't going to accomplish anything. That's absolutely wrong, and it's actually just the opposite. Complaining about the issue and doing nothing about it, that's what accomplishes nothing. However, the FBI is on to the scam. So is 47, by the way. Other federal agencies as well. And for folks who are patient, the individuals who were in any way complicit in all that's gone wrong in Minnesota, they will be held accountable. And I'll bet my lunch money on it. Something else to think about, $9 billion worth of fraud. It's a great deal of money. And you might think it's only Minnesotans who are on the hook to foot the bill. And that's absolutely incorrect. Every single tax-paying citizen all across the country now responsible for picking up the tab for a bunch of blockheads who purloined an obscene amount of dough, which came from federal funds. Hey, that's your money. It's mine as well, and we should all be demanding justice. Just don't give up. And by the way, I wonder what Kamala Harris, the Obamas, and the Clintons are saying about all this. Personally, I haven't heard them utter a single word about Walz, Omar, or the billions in fraud. I'm just thinking out loud, but it sounds kind of curious. All right, switch things up now just a bit. Shift our focus to a number of alarming and aggressive military actions currently being taken by China as they prepare for an imminent invasion of the island of Taiwan. Right now, the communist regime currently engaging in their largest and most comprehensive war games ever concerning a possible takeover of their island neighbor. As part of those exercises, they are deploying an enormous number of troops, warships, fighter jets, and more, and they're playing out a variety of battlefield scenarios in which they surround Taiwan, blockade the island's main ports, and conduct simulated live fire drills targeting key sites on both land and sea. Chinese officials say the exercises, they're designed to send a loud and a clear message to any and all foreign powers who are looking to stick their noses into the communist regime's business concerning their claim to sovereignty over the island. Now, for his part, President Trump, downplaying the communist regime's aggressive maneuvers, says he's not worried at all that those types of war games, they've been going on for years. Yeah, they have. I've watched. And that as long as he's in office, Taiwan basically has nothing to worry about. Now, some additional headlines we are keeping a very close watch on here in the News Roundup newsroom. And first up, former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says she's confident Democrats will reclaim the House of Representatives following the 2026 midterm elections. You don't say. Adding that, in her opinion, current Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries is likely to become the next Speaker of the House. That's a fine opinion, but opinions are kind of like noses. Everyone has one, and hers is wrong. Not her nose, her opinion. And moving along, following a meeting with President Trump at Mar-a-Lago, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky now says that the U.S. has offered his nation a 15-year security guarantee as part of a proposed peace deal as negotiations to end the fighting between Russia and Ukraine inches one step closer to a hopeful end. And in Florida, President Trump threatening to knock the hell, his words, knock the hell out of Iran if the Islamic regime tries to resurrect their debilitated nuclear program. That message coming shortly after Iran's president. He said that his country is currently engaged in a full-scale war with the U.S., also with Europe and Israel. And think about that, a full-scale war from a country with no water. They have to evacuate their capital, Tehran. They've got a collapsed economy. Their money's worth nothing. And no nuclear infrastructure. I think Iran is more delusional than that Governor Walz fella. And now a quick gander at a bit of rock and roll showbiz news, and we kick things off today with a cool senior who says he has no plans to stop working, even though his iconic leather jacket is already in the Smithsonian Institution. 80-year-old Happy Day star Henry Winkler says that despite his advancing age, he's not ready to call it a career, not just yet. Adding that right now, retiring, last thing on his mind. The legendary Fawn says that fortunately, he's juggling several jobs at the same time, that he's still going strong, and that the hardest part of his entire day is standing up on his wobbly knees and getting out of bed. Well, clearly age is nothing more than a state of mind. And if Henry Winkler is still gigging at the ripe young age of 80, then you got to call it like you see it and say it's coolamundo, which is, I think, one of his key phrases from that program from way back when.
Are you looking for a fight? I'd say something. I'd love to fight you. But there is a law in Milwaukee that says no cruelty to animals.
His legendary Fonzie character is the heart and soul of all that's good in the world, a pop culture icon and a guy who, in the 1970s, was instrumental in taking us back to the 1950s. Well done, Fonz, and rock on. And turning now to the silver screen, a legendary Hollywood superstar who's known for doing his own stunts, now catching a bit of flack for exaggerating the speed of his fictional jet fighter. You know, that blockbuster Top Gun Maverick, the movie opens with Tom Cruise flying an experimental aircraft that eventually tops out at more than Mach 10, which would be 10 times the speed of sound. However, critics now point out that if he ever hypothetically tried to reach that speed, Maverick would be flying so fast and so high he'd basically be killed instantly as soon as he tried to bail out of the aircraft. Personally, I disagree because I've seen real people actually do that in a number of cartoons over the years, so I think he wouldn't get hurt a bit. And if you are trying to tour the planet in something a bit faster than a Boeing 737, then Maverick might be the guy to get you there, but you might not survive the ride. Yet, to my knowledge, the military does not have in its fleet any aircraft that rumble through the skies at 7,700 miles an hour. However, producer Davey, he does get pretty close to that in his 1982 lime green Dodge Dart when he makes those McDonald's runs on the weekends. The Big Mac run. Get out the way, producer Davey coming down the hill. And we have more Titanic news to share with you about Hollywood heartthrob Leonardo DiCaprio. And according to reports, nearly 3 decades after first working together, Leo's still receiving constant romantic advice from his Titanic co-star, lovely actress Kate Winslet. Now, the reports go on to say that Kate's meddling has become so bad, now threatening to scuttle Leo's current relationship with his 27-year-old girlfriend, supermodel Vittoria Soretti, who's apparently sick and tired of Kate constantly weighing in on their little romantic love affair. Now, just a disclaimer, we know for a fact that this story is absolutely true because we read about it in the National Enquirer, and here's the deal. Leo's new gal pal absolutely correct, and his little rowboat movie co-star Kate Winslet should stand down, butt out, step aside, and let this most recent romance simply fizzle out on its own. You know, it's Hollywood where most of the romances, they have a shelf life of maybe a year or 2 or 6 weeks, and in no time at all, he'll be a bachelor once again, and then she can bug him over and over and get on his nerves all she wants. And with that, time now to call it a wrap on the big news roundup. So have an awesome day today. Stay safe. And if you haven't already done so, don't forget to hit that subscribe button right over yonder. And with that, let's dim the lights. We're going to fade to black. And we'll see you right back here tomorrow afternoon for a brand new edition of the Big News Roundup.